She wore the copper chains for 9 years. 9 years of tarnished metal pressed against a throat that should have commanded armies. 9 years of bending a spine forged from a bloodline older than the pack that owned her. 9 years of swallowing her own name every time someone spat the word servant at her back. And on the night the Alpha finally tore those chains away, the air in the great hall changed. Every candle flinched. Every wolf in that room lifted their head at the exact same instant, nostrils flaring, because the stench they had smelled on her for 9 long years, that sour, choking reek of old copper, vanished. Just gone. And what rose in its place hit them like the first cold breath of winter off a mountain none of them had ever been allowed to climb. Silver. Pure, ancestral, sovereign silver. The scent of a bloodline so old the pack's own founding alphas had once smelt to it. And the man standing over her, the alpha who had called her servant for a year, who had passed her in the corridor 1,000 times and never once guessed, that man's knees went soft beneath him. Because he finally understood what he had been orbiting all along. Stay with me. Because what you are about to hear is the story of the night a throne walked into the wrong hall, wearing the wrong chains, serving wine to the wrong men, and everyone who thought they owned her had to learn, in the space of a single heartbeat, what happens when a queen decides she's done pretending. Her name was Seren Vale. And this is the night she stopped bleeding for a lie. The scent of tarnish. If you've ever held an old penny in a closed fist on a hot day, you know the smell. That faint, metallic sourness, like blood that isn't quite blood, like iron that's been weeping in the dark. Now multiply that 100 times. Imagine that smell pressed against your collarbone, wrapped around your wrists, coiled 3 times around the hollow of your throat, every hour of every day, for 9 years running. That was Seren Vale's perfume. The chains were thin. Deliberately thin. Copper wire hammered flat by a blacksmith in the lowlands, annealed and re-annealed until the links could bend like cloth against the skin. They were not meant to restrain a body. A child could have snapped them. They were meant to restrain something else entirely, a scent. A truth. A bloodline. Because in the wolf courts of the Irefong pack, scent was identity. Scent was politics. Scent told a wolf who to bow to and who to break. And the one thing copper does real, old, tarnished copper, layered against warm skin, is drown the finer notes of a wolf's aura beneath a flat, sour, metallic shroud. Her mother had known that. Her mother had known a lot of things before the fever took her. The night the chains went on. Seren had been 11 years old, barefoot in a root cellar, listening to boots overhead that did not belong to anyone she loved. Her mother was dying quietly in the straw beside her, not the loud dying of stories, but the slow, practical dying of a woman who had one more task to finish before she let go. Give me your wrists, little moon. Seren gave them. The copper was already waiting, already cut to length, already wound with prayers in a tongue Seren could not yet read. Her mother's hands shook, but not from fear. Grief, maybe. Or refusal. Or love that had finally run out of softer expressions. They will kill you for what you are, her mother whispered, threading the first loop through the soft skin of Seren's left wrist. So, we are going to teach the world that you are nothing. You will let them. Do you understand me, Seren? You will let them. You will bend. You will pour their wine. You will sleep by their doors. And you will never, never let them smell what runs under your skin. Promise me. Seren had promised. Her mother had kissed her forehead, settled back into the straw, and died before the last link was closed. That was the night copper became Seren's second skeleton. 9 years under the iron sky. The Irefong stronghold was carved into the side of a black mountain, a fortress of stacked granite and smoke-stained timber, where the wind never quite stopped moving through the corridors. It smelled of pine resin, of old ale, of unwashed fur in the rut, of beeswax candles burning down through the night. It smelled of everything except her. By day, she carried water. By night, she served wine. She learned the angles of men. Which ones watched her for sport? Which ones would strike if she spilled? Which ones would strike if she didn't? She learned that a girl who kept her eyes low was a girl who kept her teeth. She learned to shrink, not because she was small, but because the alternative was to be seen. The other servants pitied her at first. Then they forgot her. Then, eventually, they began to resent her in that slow, uneasy way wolves resent anything they cannot categorize. Because something about Seren, under all that copper, under all that bending, never quite fit the shape of lowly. The scullery maids noticed it but couldn't name it. The stable hands avoided her corner of the yard for reasons they couldn't explain. Even the great hounds that slept by the hearth, beasts that snapped at everything, would lift their heads when she passed and follow her with their eyes. Something in her was wrong for the mask she wore. And there was one man in that fortress who felt it more than anyone. The alpha who could not stop watching. Kaius Draven had ruled the Irefong pack for 7 years. He had inherited his father's throne the way wolves always inherit thrones, through a short, brutal ceremony and a long, quiet funeral. He was 31 years old the night our story begins. Tall, dark-haired, with a jaw that never quite softened and eyes the color of wet slate. He had killed 2 challengers in his first year, 3 in his second, and had not been challenged since. He was, by every measure his pack understood, a very good alpha. He was also, though he would not have admitted it to his own reflection, bored. And the only thing in the stronghold that had ever genuinely unsettled that boredom was the quiet, copper-chain servant girl who had appeared in his hall one winter night a year ago, bent low and refused, in a way he could not prove but could not stop noticing, to truly bow. Oh, her body bowed. Her spine folded. Her eyes dropped. Every external gesture was textbook submission. But her scent never did. That was the thing that nagged him. Some part of him, the old, instinctive part, the part below language, kept reaching for her and coming back with a mouthful of tarnish. The copper stench was a wall. A flat, sour, unignorable wall. And something in Kaius refused to believe it was the whole story. He had told himself more than once that he only watched her because a good alpha watches everything. He told himself she was nothing. A stray. A fever orphan someone had dragged in from the lowlands out of pity. He told himself these things on the nights when she crossed the hall to pour his wine, and his hand, against his will, against every instinct of rank and status, would tighten on the stem of the cup. He told himself a great many things. None of them true. The first crack. It happened 3 weeks before the night the chains came off. She had been pouring for him at the long table. The hall was half drunk, loud with song, warm with the heat of bodies. Her sleeve had ridden up, just a thumb's width, nothing a distracted man would have caught, and Kaius, not distracted, had caught it. Beneath the rough linen, where wrist met forearm, the copper band had worn a pale, permanent groove into her skin. And above that groove, for the span of half a heartbeat before her sleeve fell back, he saw something no servant's arm should have carried. A mark. Not a scar. Not a bruise. Something older. A faint, raised crescent, so pale it was almost the same shade as her skin, and yet, as the firelight caught it, it shimmered, just slightly, the way oil shimmers on dark water. He knew that mark. He knew it the way a man knows the shape of his father's signature, the way a soldier knows the crest on his grandfather's sword, not with his mind, but with his blood. Somewhere in the deep archive of the Draven line, that crescent lived. He had seen it as a child, in a portrait above a fireplace, in a hall he had not entered since his mother died. He looked up at Seren. For the first time in a year of small, careful crossings, her eyes lifted. Just for a moment. Just long enough to meet his. And for the first time since he had inherited his throne, Kaius Draven felt something move in his chest that was neither hunger nor command. He felt watched. Then her eyes dropped, and the moment was gone, and she moved on down the table, and he went back to his wine, and he spent the next 3 weeks telling himself he had imagined the entire thing. He had not. The setup. The night the chains broke began, as these nights always do, with something small. A spilled cup. A slap that shouldn't have landed. A captain's cousin, a young wolf named Torin, all teeth and no patience, deciding that the copper-chain servant was not bowing deeply enough for his liking. It was the feast of the long moon. The hall was full. The table had been set for 300, and Seren had been on her feet for 11 hours. Her hands were cracked from the cold of the wine cellar. Her shoulders burned under the weight of the tray. And somewhere between the 6th and 7th pour, her body betrayed her in the only way a body can betray a woman whose every movement has been rehearsed for 9 years. She stumbled. Not badly. A half-step. Enough to tip the rim of Torin's goblet. Enough to send a single red thread of wine down the white of his sleeve. He stood up. The hall did not go silent, because halls of 300 wolves do not go silent. But the space around him did, that narrowing, pre-violent hush that spreads out from the center of a fight in rings. "On your knees," he said. She went to her knees. That was not enough. Lower. She lowered herself further, palms flat on the cold stone, forehead bending toward the floor. Her copper collar, beneath the high neckline of her servant's tunic, bit into her throat as she bent. That was not enough either. Torin was the kind of young wolf who had been waiting for a very long time for an audience. He looked up at the high table, at his alpha, at Kaius Draven, the man he needed to impress. He raised his voice so the whole hall would hear. "Alpha," he said, "this one forgets her place. I say we remind her. Tonight. Before the moon sets." And then, the request that changed everything. "Copper isn't teaching her. Let me replace it with iron." The alpha's silence. The thing about iron in a wolf court is that iron is not a suppressant. Iron is a punishment. Iron burns. Iron blisters. Iron scars a wolf's skin in ways that never quite fade, even after the cuff comes off. You do not put a servant in iron. You put an enemy in iron. You put a traitor in iron. You put a body in iron when you want the whole pack to understand that the body is no longer considered a person. Kaius Draven sat at the high table, one hand curled around the stem of his wine cup, and did not answer. He should have answered. A good alpha would have answered in the first heartbeat, yes or no, done, move on. That was the rhythm of command. That was how a hall stayed ordered. But Kaius was looking at the girl on the floor, at the pale groove of copper showing just above the collar of her tunic, at the soft curve of her bent neck, at the way her breath was going in and out in careful, practiced, completely controlled intervals. The breathing of a creature that had been on the edge of death before and knew exactly how to stay on the edge of it without falling over, and something in his chest was making a sound like cracking ice. He could feel the hall waiting. He could feel Torin's ambition vibrating like a bowstring. He could feel 100 pairs of eyes wondering if their alpha had, somehow, in some way he could not possibly have noticed, softened toward a servant. He stood up. The hall went still, properly still, this time. "No," he said, and his voice was low and level, and every wolf in that room leaned in to hear it. "No. This one is mine to correct. I'll do it myself." He looked down at her. "Follow me." The long walk. The corridor from the Great Hall to the Alpha's private chambers was the longest corridor in the Irefong stronghold. 97 paces. Seren had counted them once, a year ago, on one of the rare nights she had been summoned to bring him wine in his study. She remembered thinking, even then, that a corridor could be a kind of weather, that the air in this one always moved a half-degree colder than the air anywhere else in the keep. Tonight it was freezing. She walked 3 paces behind him, eyes on the stone, hands clasped at her waist, the copper chain at her throat biting in rhythm with her pulse. She could hear his boots on the flagstones. She could hear his breathing, steady, deliberate, too steady, the breathing of a man who was trying very hard to seem less angry than he was. She could not, for the life of her, figure out what had just happened at the high table. He should have let Torin have her. That was how the politics worked. A young wolf gets bold, asks for a scrap, the alpha grants it, the pack sees dominance reinforced, the night moves on. Letting her live was nothing. Letting a servant be brutalized in a corner of the yard was nothing. Saying no was a signal. Saying I'll do it myself was a much louder signal. Saying mine to correct, in a voice that had cracked, just slightly, on the word mine, was a signal she did not dare let herself interpret. They reached his chambers. He held the door open for her. That was the second wrong thing. He did not push her through. He did not grab her by the arm. He stood back, and he let her enter, and when she crossed the threshold, he closed the door behind them and set the heavy iron bolt into place with his own hand, and the sound of that bolt sliding home was the sound of the last 9 years of her life ending. In his chambers. His chambers were not what you would expect from a man who ruled 3,000 wolves. They were spare, almost monastic. A long, low bed of dark wood, dressed in unbleached linen. A stone hearth with a fire burning down to embers. A heavy desk buried under maps. A single tall window overlooking the Black Valley, its shutters thrown open to the cold. The air smelled of smoke and pine and the faint, clean, animal warmth of him. No copper anywhere. She noticed that. She always noticed that. He crossed the room, slowly, to a chest at the foot of the bed. He opened it. Iron glinted inside. A cuff. A collar. A full-set, military-grade, polished to a mirror shine. The kind of restraint you put on a war prisoner. The kind of restraint that left marks a wolf wore for the rest of her life. He lifted the collar out and set it on the desk with a soft, metallic click. Then he turned to her. "Take off your tunic." She did not move. Not out of defiance. Out of shock. Out of the sudden, bone-deep understanding that this man who had just stood for her in a hall of 300, was about to replace her copper with something that would, over weeks and months, burn her until her shoulders forgot how to carry anything at all. Seren. His voice was quieter now. Almost gentle. Almost. Don't make me ask twice. The pushback. And here, right here, 9 years into a silence she had sworn to her dying mother she would keep, something in Seren Vale finally moved. Not her voice. Her chin. She lifted it. Just a fraction. Just enough that when her eyes came up off the floor, they met his and held. He froze. For a long, impossible second, neither of them breathed. She was looking at him the way a queen looks at a man she is deciding whether to forgive. She wasn't doing it on purpose. She didn't even know her face was doing it. 9 years of suppression had cracked in exactly one place, in exactly one muscle, and the thing that lived underneath had surfaced for half a breath before she could shove it back down. But he saw it. And something in his chest did that cracking ice sound again, only louder, and this time he could hear it, and he did not know what it meant, and he did not like not knowing. He crossed the room in 3 strides. His hand closed around the copper collar at her throat. Not hard, not cruel, but firm, in the way a man touches a thing he intends to remove. He meant to unbuckle the copper first. That was the ritual. Copper off, iron on. A changing of the mask. He was alpha. He was entitled. He was doing this correctly. He got a finger under the edge of the copper band. And Seren, in a motion she did not plan, did not understand, and would never fully be able to explain, put her own hand over his and said, in a voice that was barely a whisper, but carried the full weight of 9 buried years, a single word. Don't. The air in the room changed. Not because of the word. Because of the way she'd said it. That was not a servant's voice. That was not a beggar's voice. That was not even a woman's voice, not exactly. That was the voice of something that had been asleep for a very long time, briefly waking up to say no. Kaius looked down at her hand on his. He looked up at her face. And then, for reasons he would spend the rest of his life trying to explain, he pulled. Not hard. It didn't have to be hard. Copper that old, worn that thin, pressed against skin for 9 years, only ever needed a single honest tug from an alpha's hand to come apart. The link above her collarbone snapped with a small, almost musical ping. The copper collar fell. and the world ended. The first breath. I want you to imagine a room. A stone room, high in a mountain, in the middle of a winter night. A fire burning low. Two people standing a hand's breadth apart. One of them has just had 9 years of copper cut from her throat. Neither of them has yet taken a full breath. Now imagine that the air in that room, the actual air, the physical atmosphere pressing against the shutters and the window glass, was about to discover what it had been breathing around for 9 years and was about to have opinions. The stench came first. Or rather, the absence of the stench. For 9 years, anyone within 10 paces of Seren Vale had smelled the same thing: old pennies, sour tarnish, a dull metallic weight that crowded out every finer scent. It was so constant that the wolves of the Irefong had stopped noticing it the way a man stops noticing a low hum in his own house. It didn't fade out. It vanished, the way a candle vanishes when you close your fist on the flame. Kaius took a breath. And he staggered. Actually, physically, visibly staggered, one knee buckling a full inch before he caught himself on the edge of the desk, because what flooded into his lungs in the place of that copper wasn't a scent. It was a memory. It was his father's private chapel when he was 6 years old. It was the cold, sweet air off the high glacier where his grandfather had taken him on the day of his naming. It was the smell of his own oldest, most sacred oaths, the ones he had sworn at 12 and not remembered since. It was moonlight, if moonlight had a smell. It was silver. Not the silver of coins. The silver of blood. The silver of a bloodline older than the Irefong, older than the Draven name, older than the very stones he was standing on. He lifted his head, and the thing standing in the center of his chambers was no longer a servant. The aura. She hadn't moved. She hadn't even fully understood yet what had just happened. Her hand was still half raised where his had been. Her eyes were still wide. The collar was still in pieces at her feet. But something around her, in the very air, had begun to glow. Not brightly. Not like a lamp. Like the barely there shimmer you see at the edge of a lake at dawn, when the mist is just thinking about lifting. A faint, cool, iridescent halo, the color of the inside of an oyster shell, hanging in the air a hand span off her skin. It moved with her breath. It pulsed gently with the beat of her heart. And as Kaius watched, it sharpened, gaining definition, until he could see the shape of it, a full-body aura, trailing softly behind her shoulders like the hem of a gown made of smoke. 9 years of suppression, coming out of her all at once. He knew what he was looking at. He had read about it exactly once, in his father's oldest book, in a chapter his father had made him read twice. The Silver Mantle. The living aura worn only by the blood of the Moonsilver line, the first royalty, the old sovereigns, the bloodline to whom every alpha of every pack north of the Great River had sworn a binding oath 600 years ago. A bloodline believed, for the last 3 generations, to be extinct. A bloodline Kaius Draven, at his own crowning, had sworn on his father's grave to serve should any heir ever be found. And he had spent the last year calling one of them servant. The collapse. His legs went out from under him. He did not decide to kneel. He did not choose it. His body, operating on an instinct older than his name, older than his title, older than any decision he had ever made, simply folded. Both knees struck the stone at once. His hands fell open at his sides. His chin dropped not in shame, but in the old, ritual posture of a wolf presenting his throat to a sovereign. He had never knelt to anyone before in his life. Not his father. Not the council. Not even at his own crowning, where he had stood straight-backed while the crown was placed on his head. He knelt now. He could not have done anything else. Seren, for her part, had finally begun to understand what was happening to her body. The copper had been, all her life, a kind of weight, a pressure against her skin, a damping of every sense, a constant dull ache in her bones. She had gotten so used to it that she had forgotten what without felt like. But now, standing in the middle of that stone room, with the cold air pouring in through the open shutters and the firelight catching in the strange silver mist that hung around her shoulders, she could feel her own pulse for the first time in 9 years. It was strong. It was slow. It was royal. Every wolf, on some level, carries the knowledge of their own rank in the marrow of their bones. Seren had carried the knowledge of hers buried under 9 years of copper and shame, and now, released, it rose up through her chest and into her throat and settled behind her eyes like a crown being lowered onto a head. She looked down. The alpha of the Irefang was on his knees at her feet. The man who, 97 paces ago, had marched her through a freezing corridor with the intention of collaring her in iron. That man was now on both knees with his chin tucked and his palms upturned on his thighs, and he was trembling. And his breathing had gone shallow and fast, and she understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that he was waiting for her to speak. She did not speak. She wanted to. She had things to say. 9 years of things. But her mother's voice, older and deeper than any of them, rose up through her chest and held her tongue a second longer, because a sovereign's first word, once reclaimed, cannot be taken back. It becomes law the moment it leaves the mouth. She took her time. The sound beyond the door. Somewhere out in the corridor, a sound began. It was soft at first. Then it spread. It was the sound wolves make when they recognize something their ancestors recognized, a low, harmonic, involuntary whine that starts in the chest and rises through the throat. 1 wolf. Then 2. Then a dozen. Then the entire great hall, 300 wolves strong, dropping their goblets, lifting their noses, and making the same sound at once. Because the scent of silver had reached the hall. It had traveled under the door of Kaius Draven's private chamber and down 97 paces of freezing corridor and under the great oak doors of the feast hall and into 300 sets of lungs and every wolf who breathed it felt at the base of their skull. The ancient oath that their great-grandfathers had sworn on the banks of the great river 6 centuries ago suddenly remembered itself. The hall did not cheer. The hall did not riot. The hall knelt. Servants, warriors, captains, cousins of captains, every living body in the Irefang stronghold went down on one knee where they stood, because their bones told them to, because there was a sovereign in the keep, and no wolf who still breathed the old blood could stand upright in her presence without permission. Torin, the young wolf who had asked for her to be put in iron, dropped his cup. It shattered. He did not notice. He was on his knees with his forehead touching the flagstones, weeping, in a way he would never afterward be able to explain, because his body had simply chosen to, and his mind had been forced to follow. The Irefang pack had just received its true alpha, and she had not yet spoken a word. The man on the floor. Let us go back, for a moment, to the room. To the fire burning low. To the cold air coming in through the open shutters. To the scattered pieces of copper on the stone floor. To the woman standing at the center of it all, dressed in a servant's tunic, wearing an aura of living silver. And to the man on his knees at her feet. Kaius Draven had spent his entire adult life learning not to feel things. That was part of the job. An alpha who felt too much made bad decisions. An alpha who felt too little eventually got challenged and died. The trick was to feel the minimum, and to feel it in the correct directions. Loyalty to the pack. Distrust of rivals. A cold, calibrated appetite for the women who offered themselves at court. Nothing that could not be filed, sorted, and forgotten by morning. He was, at this moment, feeling approximately 9 years of things at once. He was feeling the horror of every single time he had passed her in the corridor and not lifted a finger. He was feeling the shame of every glance he had let linger, not because she was worthy of a glance, which she was, which she had always been, but because he had told himself she was not. He was feeling the sick, retroactive knowledge of every cruelty his hall had inflicted on her while he sat above them on his father's carved chair and did not intervene. He was also, God help him, feeling something else. He was feeling, for the first time in his life, what it was like to be in the presence of a woman who was, by every measure his blood understood, above him. And somewhere, in the deep animal architecture of him, the part of him that had nothing to do with titles or courts or thrones, something was stirring that he did not yet have the courage to name. She had not told him to stand. He could not stand until she did. The first word. Seren took one step forward. Her bare feet made no sound on the stone. The copper pieces lay behind her now, discarded, irrelevant. The silver mist around her shoulders caught the dying firelight and threw it softly against the walls, so that the whole chamber seemed, for a moment, to be lit from within by a moon that had decided to spend the night indoors. She stopped an arm's length from him. She looked down at the top of his bent head, at the dark, thick hair she had glimpsed 1,000 times from below, from the angle of a servant pouring wine, and was now seeing from the angle of a sovereign being offered her rightful obeisance. She spoke. Not loudly. She did not have to. Kaius Draven. He flinched as though she had struck him. A wolf's true name, in the mouth of a sovereign, carries a weight no lesser mouth can replicate. Yes, my lady. That was not the title he should have used. My lady is what a wolf calls a woman he is courting, not a sovereign. But he had, without thinking, reached for the softest word in his vocabulary, and it had come out before the proper titles could correct it. She noticed. He noticed that she noticed. A slow, dark flush climbed his throat. She did not correct him. How long, she asked quietly, have you known there was something wrong with me? He closed his eyes. A year, my lady. And you did not act. I did not understand, my lady. You did not want to understand, she said, and the air in the room dropped a full degree colder. Because understanding would have cost you. A servant is a thing a man can have. A sovereign is a woman to whom a man must give. He did not answer. There was no answer. She was correct. In every particular. And both of them knew it. The reckoning of arrogance. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. And in that look, a great deal of what Kaius Draven had believed about himself quietly died. He had believed, for instance, that he was a just man. He had believed that he ruled his hall fairly. He had believed that the machinery of his court, the slaps, the cuffs, the casual brutalities he had not personally inflicted but had not personally stopped, was simply the natural shape of a pack, the price of order. He was no longer sure of any of that. Because it is one thing to believe your cruelty was justified when you can tell yourself your victim was nothing. It is another thing entirely to look up from your knees and see the halo of the Moonsilver line hanging in the air around the woman your hall had been grinding under its heel for 9 years. You let them strike me, she said. Yes. You let them call me names no woman should be called. Yes. You would have put iron on me tonight. A pause. Yes, my lady. His voice cracked on the yes. She watched him. The fire guttered in the grate. Somewhere outside the shutters, a wolf in the valley threw back its head and howled a long, low, harmonic howl that did not belong to any living throat Seren knew. The old ones were singing. The moon was telling the mountains what had just happened in a stone room high in the Irefong Keep. She could feel, through the soles of her bare feet, the entire pack kneeling beneath her. She could have destroyed him with a sentence. She did not. Instead, she reached down slowly, with a grace that had been waiting 9 years to come back into her hands, and she placed one cool fingertip under his chin. She lifted his face until his eyes had no choice but to meet hers. His eyes were wet. She had not expected that. Stand up, Alpha, she said softly. You and I are going to have a very long conversation. But not on the floor. He stood. He was a head and a half taller than her. He had always been, but in that moment, with the silver mist of her aura drifting between them, it did not feel that way. It felt, instead, as though some long misaligned geometry of the universe had finally snapped back into its correct shape. And when his eyes met hers and held, Seren Vale felt, for the very first time, under nothing but her own skin, the full and terrible weight of what it was going to mean to be looked at, for the rest of her life, by a man who had been looking at her in secret for a year and was finally allowed to do it honestly. Her pulse, somewhere under all that silver, did something it had not done in 9 years. It stuttered. She made sure it did not show. But he, wolf that he was, with his scent now flooding the room in a way he could not hide either, he knew. And both of them, standing there in the dying firelight with the copper scattered at their feet, understood at the same time that whatever came next between them was going to be very, very slow. And very, very inevitable. The morning after. Dawn came pale and cold over the Black Valley. It found the Irefong stronghold changed. There is no drama quite like the drama of a court the morning after it has discovered, collectively, that it has been wrong about everything. The corridors that night were full of people who could not sleep. Captains who had, the day before, ordered Seren Vale to fetch and carry, now stood outside their own doors with their hands open at their sides, waiting for judgment. Servants who had elbowed her in the scullery stood in the kitchen staring at their own hands. Torin, the young wolf who had called for iron, was found by the guards before first light, kneeling in the middle of the hall with his forehead pressed to the stone, refusing food, refusing speech, waiting. The Moonsilver line is not cruel. That is one of the oldest things said about it. But it is also not soft. And every wolf in the keep knew, by the time the first gray light crept over the eastern peaks, that an accounting was coming. She held court at midday. Not in the great hall, not yet. She held it in the small council chamber where the business of the pack was truly done. She wore a simple gown of unbleached linen because she had no other clothes yet. No one had thought, in the chaos, to bring her anything else. Her feet were bare. Her hair was loose. The silver aura had settled now. It no longer shimmered around her shoulders like mist, but it lived under her skin, a faint, constant, unmistakable glow at her throat and her wrists and the hollows of her temples. She did not sit on the high chair. She stood beside it, one hand resting on its back, and she called them in one at a time. The accounting. Torin was first. He came in on his knees and stayed on his knees, and when she asked him why he had called for iron, he did not lie. He said that he had wanted to impress the Alpha. He said that he had hated her a little for the way the hounds followed her with their eyes. He said that he had sensed something in her he could not name, and had wanted, cruelly, to crush it before it could name itself. She listened. Then she spoke the first royal decree of her reign. Torin of the Irefong, she said, you will not be put in iron. You will not be exiled. You will not be struck. You will be stripped of your rank, and for 1 full year you will serve in the scullery where I served. You will carry water. You will pour wine. You will sleep by the kitchen door. And at the end of that year, if you have learned what I believe you can learn, you will stand before this court again, and we will speak of who you are. He wept openly. Yes, my lady. On your feet, wolf. A creature cannot learn anything useful while it is on its knees. He went, on shaking legs, to begin his year. So it went for most of the day. Some received mercy. A few, whose cruelties had crossed from ordinary into the unforgivable, did not, but even for them, her justice was cold, not hot, proportionate, not vengeful, a scalpel, not a hammer. The pack watched her, and the pack learned her, and by sundown a great deal of what the Irefong had been was already something it was no longer going to be. Kaius. She called him last. By the time he stepped into the council chamber, the sky outside the narrow window had gone the deep blue of winter twilight, and the only light in the room came from the 2 tall candles on either side of the high chair, and from the faint, living glow under her skin. She did not speak right away. Neither did he. He had changed his clothes since morning. Plain black wool, no rank markings. He had not shaved. His eyes were still, she noticed, a little red at the edges. He stopped in the center of the room and did not kneel, because she had made it clear, through the course of the day, that she would tell a wolf when to kneel and when not to, but he did bow his head, and he kept his hands loose at his sides, and he waited. Kaius, she said. My lady, the old oath your grandfather swore on the banks of the river has reasserted itself. You know that. I do. Your title is mine now if I want it. It is. Your throne is mine if I want it. It is, my lady. A pause. Do you want me to take it? He lifted his head. He looked at her for a long moment, and in that look, every careful wall he had built around himself for the last 9 years, no, longer, for his whole life, visibly came apart. He was not an easy man to read, Kaius Draven. He had made a career of being unreadable. But right then, in that candlelit chamber, with the silver light of her glowing softly between them, he was the most readable man in the world. He wanted her to take it. He wanted her to take everything: the throne, the title, the hall, the keep, the name, the nights, the mornings, the long slow years he had not known he was waiting for. He wanted her to take it all and make something new of it, and he wanted to stand at her shoulder while she did. He did not say any of that. He said, instead, very quietly, I would prefer, my lady, to spend the rest of my life making up for a year. She looked at him. Something in her chest, the part of her that had not yet become sovereign, the part of her that was still, in some corner, a 20-year-old girl who had been looking at this man across crowded halls for 12 full months. That part of her understood exactly what he had just offered. The queen in her understood, too. The queen was slower. The queen had 9 years of copper to remember. Then you will have the chance, she said. But you will earn it, Alpha. Slowly. In full view of this court. On my terms. At my pace. Do you understand me? Yes, my lady. Say it again. Yes, my queen. Her pulse did the small, traitorous thing again. She did not let it show. But he, wolf that he was, knew. And she, sovereign that she was, knew that he knew. And neither of them said another word, because some agreements are only spoiled by being spoken aloud. The window. That night, late, when the keep had finally gone quiet and the valley was full of moonlight, Seren Vale stood alone at the tall window of what was now her chamber, the same room, as it happened, where the copper had come off, because she had decided there was a kind of justice in reclaiming it, and she let the cold air move against her unchained throat. She could feel, for the first time in her life, the full weight of her own bloodline moving under her skin. It was not a light thing. It was not a prize. It was a responsibility the size of a mountain range, and it would, she understood, demand every hour of every day for the rest of her natural life. She thought she might be ready. She thought her mother, somewhere, might finally be allowed to rest. Down in the valley, a wolf was singing. Up on the eastern peak, another answered. In the corridors of the keep behind her, the pack she had inherited was slowly, awkwardly, learning the shape of a sovereign they had been abusing 3 days ago. Somewhere on the floor below her, Kaius Draven was, she knew without having to check, sitting awake in the dark with his elbows on his knees, waiting for a morning in which he would be allowed, on her terms, to begin. She closed her eyes. And she let herself smile, just once, just briefly, the private, unhurried smile of a woman who had spent 9 years being nothing, and who had a great deal of time, now, to be everything. That is the story of Seren Vale, the servant who was a sovereign, the copper who was only ever a costume, the alpha who spent a year looking at a queen and calling her astray. And I'll tell you something, friend. If you made it this far, if you stayed with her through 9 years of tarnish and the 97 paces of that freezing corridor and the moment the chain gave way on her collarbone, then you already know something about her that the Irefong pack had to learn the hard way. You knew it from the first minute. You felt it in your chest before the title card ever appeared. You knew she wasn't a servant. So here's what I'm going to ask. And I'm going to ask it the way she would ask it, quietly, without pressure, in a voice that assumes you already know the answer. If something in you rose when those chains hit the floor, tap that like. Let the algorithm know a sovereign came through here tonight. If you've ever, in your own life, carried copper you didn't deserve to carry, drop me a comment. 1 line. Tell me what you would have said to Kaius Draven when he finally lifted his eyes. I read every one. I mean that. And if there is someone in your life, a daughter, a sister, a friend, anyone who you think has been wearing chains that were never theirs to wear, send them this story. Quietly. No note. Just send it. Let them hear, in Seren's voice, what you've been trying to tell them in yours. A new chapter drops on this channel every week. And the next one, the morning after, the long winter, the slow burn of a man making up for a year, the first time Seren calls him by his name and means it, that one is coming soon. Subscribe if you want to be there when it does. Hit the bell if you want to be there first. Until then, lift your chin, friend. The copper was never yours. The silver always was. Good night.